According to YouTube, I haven't posted enough. They want me to post more content. So consider this content. But I'm not going to waste any of your time. We're going to get right into it. So I want to talk about some of the VFX from New Frontiers. So this is a VFX shot that I just finished up. It's a pretty short one. I wanted to get something that didn't really give much away, so just shooting down some Reapers and Stalkers in Titanfall. But I wanted to get into like how the VFX are done. They're not 100% final on this shot because a lot of the finalization of the VFX actually ties together in the color grading, but this is like a really good baseline to be at when going into that stage. And I kind of wanted to show you the tricks and hacks that I use for this. So one of my mindsets in like creating this whole thing is to not do everything solely in Unreal Engine. Instead, I'm doing, like a more traditional movie pipeline across the board. So, this scene has a lot of classical VFX tricks on top of footage that's just the rendered animation, background and lighting and all that, along with some stuff that I planned beforehand. So for example, like this Reaper and this Stalker, in the animation phase, they just blipped out. They disappeared because I knew they were going to blow up in their entirety just to make it a little bit more visually interesting. Starting all the way back out here, we'll reverse engineer this whole thing. So one of the things I like to add for especially like destructive things is just adding camera shake on where things really hit. So obviously like anytime, these giant Titan machine guns are firing, which yes, it's a North Star holding an XO16. Part of the story. But with that, like every time one of those fires, there's going to be camera shake. So adding that in, adding, some shake every time there's an explosion, all that just helps tie the whole shot together so it doesn't look overly smooth. So that's kind of the final touch that a lot of these VFX shots go through when they're dealing with, something heavier that the shot just needs more weight added to it, because otherwise this is just a smooth camera move. So let's dive right into here. This is where all the comping takes place. So essentially every one of these layers in here, they each have, I say layers and my face is in the way. Let me move my face. I'll go up here. So every one of these layers right here, these all have things comped inside of them. So in some cases that might be smoke. For example, like the smoke coming off of the XO16 is all in its own comp. So in here, it just kind of travels and moves, with it. But then, so I don't have to deal with all these layers, I just break them all down into a single composition. So in here, they're just one layer that I can, tweak and manipulate. So that's pretty much the case with every one of these. Some of these are rotoed out layers, which essentially means like when there's elements happening behind something, this layer is in front of it. So it's essentially been cut out and put back on top so we can put stuff behind it. So that's essentially what all these layers are. Now to get into the meat and potatoes of it, all these are tied together in this layer called Super Comp, which is a tool from a Giant, which is a life and time saver. It just makes everything infinitely better. So I'll show you kind of what this looks like with that turned off. We'll find kind of a good, so we'll go forward a couple frames. Kind of when there's like some kicked up dirt, that looks nice. Right about here. We'll go just to when the muzzle's firing. So if I shut off Super Comp, that's what the shot looks like. So everything like feels really flat and not really integrated. When you turn the Super Comp on, it just starts to blend everything together in a much nicer way. Yeah, so like this is with it on, that's with it off. So it just ties things together really nicely. And I'll show you real quick what that looks like. So it essentially looks exactly the same, just in here you're stacking effects on these layers. So you can do everything from doing light wraps and glows to, using color correction to make the asset match the background a little bit nicer. So tons of, little tweaks that happen in here. I like to add the tiniest bit of glow to the render itself, just so that it shows itself more in the background of all the layers, if that makes sense. So that's super comp. And the last thing I wanted to show is how I do the muzzle flashes. So the muzzle flashes are combine two things. One is another Red Giant plugin called Bang, which is like the greatest plugin ever created for VFX artists. So essentially what it does is it gives you kind of this UI, and you can position the muzzle, you can position the barrel of the gun like anywhere in your scene. You can even, select this point away option. It's going to give you something different, but it's going to procedurally generate a new muzzle flash every time the gun fires. So you don't need to reuse assets, and you control everything from the shape of it, to kind of have these nice keyframe options. That's probably not super. Oh, that's on the pedals. That's why. So if I drop one of these down, you can already see that it's just updating and changing based off of that. And then they have this flash age, and then with the sparks, I really love adding sparks into, every single shot. So you can dial back how much those are actually going to affect. I love having sparks in the muzzle flashes. I just think it makes it that much cooler, and it makes the gun feel bigger when you're dealing with these larger weapons. But it's not that just by itself, because even though this looks great and for a lot of footage it's going to do the job, and even does some nice environmental lighting if you want to use that on your shot. But the other thing that I use is a lens flare, which is another Red Giant. This is just Red Giant all over the place. That's my VFX secret. Use Red Giant. But I use their plugin called No Light Factory, which essentially just generates a lens flare, which I've changed the brightness, the scale, and it follows the same position. I even have that same Bang layer in here. It just doesn't activate at all. So as it's moving, it's just copying that same position. And then I'm using one of the roto layers that just has everything that should be in front of that flare. That's in the scene, but it's just turned off. And No Light Factory is using that layer to obscure itself. So it only shows up when it's not behind one of those. But then the layer can sit on top and behave like a flare is supposed to. So all that combined together, you get something that looks pretty sweet. And this is 2.5 seconds. It's a lot of work for a 2.5 second shot, but it does that much more to make it feel, more real and look cool. So that's really it. Just wanted to show it off.